Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Gareth David and I'm a freelance designer based in London. With over 13 years experience, I specialise in logo design, visual branding and brand strategy. As well as that, I run a YouTube channel which to date has a number of Adobe courses and graphic design series specifically catered to the beginner. So if you're new to Photoshop, InDesign and After Effects, or want to learn more about graphic design, you can go check out some courses and series I have there. And as well as all of that, I currently mentor a design student at Kingston University, where I'm currently helping with their portfolio and post-graduation career guidance. So with that brief introduction, let's get into the demonstration. So in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating two things. First, I'll be demonstrating a design challenge I faced and showcasing a technique I used to develop my design and compositions. And then I'll be demonstrating how I bring my designs to life in Photoshop with some simple techniques. So in this video, I'll be touching on a bit of design process and talking a little about my thinking and how I come up with my design, and then a demonstration of design artworking. So let's get into it. So let's start with the challenge. So the challenge I faced here was to design and develop some label and packaging design for a fictional craft beer company called Wild IPA for a variety of flavours. Now, some of you may not be familiar or even drink craft beer, but looking at some current label designs, there are a lot of really interesting, bright and contemporary designs on the market. So for this challenge, I wanted to take inspiration and create something fun, contemporary and edgy. And here is the result of one of the designs I came up with. For the design, I have chosen to use a texture and pattern package full of lots of cool textures, an illustration asset package, and a typeface which can all be accessed from the Design Cuts marketplace. So at the start of my design challenge, I knew I was going to develop a label design, and I knew I was going to use some of these assets which I had already seen. So how did I come up with the design? Well, like I always do when thinking about design, I start on paper. Now, I'm a big advocate that design happens on paper and not the computer. When thinking about design, I always sketch on paper and try to visualize my ideas first, and only when I have something I'm happy with and think works, do I then take it onto the computer. So what you see here is a picture of some of my sketches I did initially. Now, there is generally a lot of scribbling and rough drafts before this, but what you see here are the more polished design concepts I developed ready to take onto the computer. So here you can see the ideas I had for the label designs. Here there are 4 different designs for the different flavors. They use the same style but use the textures in different ways, in different compositions. Here you can see how I thought about using the assets in each composition as a textured background. And on top of this would be more of a typographic composition, slightly angled. So from these scamp designs, you can see what I had in mind for a label design and how I wanted to compose the elements. Now initially, I will work in black and white, and I like to use markers with different weights to emphasize certain parts of the design. And typically on a design job, I will showcase these to the client in the early stages. Now there is a good quote here that is relevant, and that is, "Rough layouts sell the idea better than polished ones." And this was said by Paul Arden. Now this is generally true because showing a client sketches like this, they see the potential where the design is not finished. The client feels more engaged and part of the process discussing a potential idea. A sketch like this will encourage the imagination, whereas a more polished version seems more finalized. Now, sketches like these will typically never amount to the final design, but do outline a key concept which I always develop further in the artworking stage. So after my initial label designs, I then thought how they would look on a can. Here I am looking at how the design could be used in a more narrow frame, looking at the front of the can. Now once I'm happy with my black and white compositions, I then think about colour. So here you can see the same designs as earlier, but now I am thinking about how colour may work. Now typically I will use graphic marker pens to develop a lot of colour ideas, but what you see here are the chosen colourways I wanted for the label designs. So at this stage, when I'm happy with my concepts on paper, I will then look to take them onto the computer, artwork, and develop the designs further. So for this example, I'm going to showcase how I developed just one of the designs. And here you can see the initial design on paper. And here is my chosen colorway. And here is how the initial artwork looked developed on the computer compared to my design on paper. And if you look closely, you can see that a few things have changed during the artworking process on the computer. Now, once the initial artworking was done, I then looked at how it would work on a can, as seen from the front. And as we can see here, when applied to the can as a label, I made some further changes incorporating the illustration element and making that a bigger part of the overall design on the front of the can. So here we can see the evolution of the original design from paper and how it typically tends to develop further during the artworking phase and when applied in situ. So here's another example of the design in situ, how it looks together as a set, how the design can extend itself onto a glass, how the design can extend itself onto packaging such as a box, and finally how the same artworking techniques can be used for the other flavors to create the full set, and how these can be used on other brand collateral such as mats. So that's an introduction to what my challenge was and how I approached it. Let's now jump into Photoshop and see how I artworked my sketch concept and developed my design. So here we are in Photoshop, and this is what I'm about to demonstrate and showcase how I'm going to create this design here. And as we can see, this is the original sketch, and this is what I created in Photoshop. So let's take a look at how we can do this. So first I'm going to start with my sketch, which I've scanned in and brought in. Now, what is really good about having sketches and bringing them in is that they form a nice basis for us to start with. So instead of starting with a complete blank canvas, we have something to start with, which can make things a little bit easier. So first I'll select all and copy this, and I'll press Command N to create a new document. And I'm going to start with like an A4 document, and I'm going to go for full res, so it'll be nice and high resolution. So I'll click that and I'll paste inside like so. Next I'll press Command T, because what I like to do is see or create a guide. So I'll press Command R to pull up my guides, and I'll move that across and just put it in the center like so, and activate my guides so I can start with a nice center line. As I develop my artwork, I'll be using this as a reference point. So with my sketch selected, I'll just press 2 on the keyboard, and that will make the opacity 20% so I can start to work on top of it. Now, I want to create a design which is a little bit wider than the A4 because I want to potentially spread the artwork over a wider canvas area in future. So I'll press C of the keyboard to activate the crop, and I'll just click and drag holding Alt on both sides, and this will just push the canvas area out a little bit wider, and I'll press Enter to commit to that. I'll press G to activate the paint bucket tool. I'll click back on the background layer, I'll double click that to release the lock, and with the white as the foreground color, I'll just click on the outside. So now I have a wider canvas area than I did previously. And the first thing I'm going to do is start with the type area in the middle. So I'll start with a shape. So I'll come over to my shape tool and click a rectangle shape, and I'll just click and drag that out like so. And that is currently there, but it's below my sketch, so I'll just bring that up, and now I can see it, it's right there. So I'll press A, and that will show me my fill and stroke colors up in the top here, and I'll just set the stroke to black and set that to a 10, and I'll put the alignment to the outside, and that's just going to allow me set that to 10. That's just going to allow me to see my box there. So I'll press T and make sure that's set in the middle, and then I'll press T to activate the type tool and click once, and I'll type in wild IPA, and that's currently set to white, and I'll just come and change that to a black, and I'll come up and make sure that this is set to bison, and it'll be bold. And again, with the type selected, I'll set that to a central aligned. So when I press Command T, I can just put that in place and just click and drag out up on the top. And I think right now the tracking's looking a bit wide, so I'll just come to that and set the tracking back to its default. So there you go. And then I'll press T again and just blow that up a little bit inside my white box. Make sure that's in the center. Now I'll right click and select my rectangle, press Command T to activate free transform, press Alt and Shift just to bring that in a little bit. So I fit my type a bit more snug there in my box. And if I think that's looking a little bit small, I'll come up to my layers panel, click on the type element and the shape element, press Command G, and I'll rename this to wild. So now I have my elements there. I'll press Command T and just open that up a little bit and expand that up. Okay, so with that, I'm going to duplicate it down very quickly. So with my group selected, I'll press Alt and Shift and just click down like so, and that will quickly duplicate that group. I'll press T to click into my type and call this the name of the product. So in this case, it's one's called Savage. And I'll come up to the layers panel, double click and change this to Savage so I can clearly see it. Nice one. So that's the two elements there. Now on the sketch, we can see that I have one block down here. But if we look on the final design, I've actually changed this slightly to incorporate max strength underneath. So back in my design, I'm going to come and click on Savage and drag this down like so, and that'll immediately duplicate it. I'll press T and click into the text and just type in release the beast. And I'll commit that and just bring the type down a little bit to fit into the box. I'll bring it up. But this time I'll press T and push out the tracking a little. Just want to change the style a little bit like that. And I'll just bring, press Command T and then just bring the scale down a little. Right click on the box, press Command T, Shift and just bring it up a little bit. Or I can just, press Shift to bring it up. To get proportions, and I'll just place release the beast in there a bit more appropriately. For now that'll do. And I'll come up to my layers panel, double click on Savage and just rename this. I like to do a bit of housekeeping as I go along just to keep things really nice and neat in my layers panel so I know where everything is. And with that done, I'll press, with that release group selected, I'll press Alt and Shift and drag down once more. Carefully place that on top. And inside, press T and click this and type in max strength IPA. And on this occasion, I'll just come up and change the bold to a demi bold. Yeah, that'll be fine for now. So with these, and then come up to the layers panel, double click on release and just change this to max. So now I've got these two new elements down here. So with this as a composition, I'm happy with that for now. So what I'll do is I'll come up into the layers panel, double click, click once on the top folder, holding Shift, I'll click on the bottom folder, right click, and I'm going to convert this to a smart object. And I'll double click on that and just call this the type comp. Now the reason that I've created this as a smart object is because if we look underneath, we can see that the type design is at a slight angle. Now I'm going to double click on this, press Command T, and holding Command, I'm just going to drag this up a little bit just to match what's happening below. So really quickly and really easily, I can just create a little angle like that. And I press Command T just to make sure that's set in the middle. And that's cool. Now, if we look at the final design, you can see that there are some slight modifications to the type here. So I really like the type, but there are some things I'd like to do just to customize it a little bit and to make it my own. So now what I'll do is I'll start with wild IPA. So what I'll do is I'll come back in up to the layers panel here, double click, and this will open my smart object with all the layers and the groups and folders inside as such. But I want to create a little bit of room to maneuver here. So like earlier, I'll press C for crop, press Alt and just pull that out a little bit. And I might give myself a little bit of height as well. Because what I'll do here is I'll click on Savage and I just want to offset that a little bit, just to give it a little bit of movement, just so it feels a little bit more edgy. And what I want to do is I want to tweak the type a little bit. As we can see, we want to make some modifications here. So now in my wild folder, we can see my type element here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and convert to a smart object, because I'm going to double click in here, and here I'm going to create a new layer. Command Shift N to create a new layer. I'll press B to activate my brush tool. I'm going to make sure I've got a solid brush, and I'll make sure it's black like the type. I'm just going to color on top like so, and fill in these negative spaces within the words. And one thing I would like to do is just change the A. I want to take this crossbar away. So I'll press L to activate the lasso tool. And normally I'd spend a bit more time on this, but for the sake of the tutorial and to speed things up, I'll just go as quick as possible here. So now I've got this selection. I'm going to press Command Shift I, and that's going to invert the selection. And I'll be careful to click on the text layer, and I'll come down and apply a mask. Now with the mask, you'll see that I've changed the type a little bit there. So I'll press Command W and close that, and now we have our type like so. Now I also want to change the type down here as well, Savage. So I'll right click and click on Savage. Up in the layers panel, right click, convert to smart object, double click into that. And here I'll press L to grab the lasso tool. I'll just click there like so, and across, double click there. This time I'll hold Shift, which so I can add to the selection. I'll click down, across like that. And then finally I want to come over to the G and just get rid of that little crossbar there. So now I have that selection. I'll press Command Shift I, and again down to the mask, and there you go, little mask there. I press Command W to close and save, and then we have our type element like so. Easy. So everything else is fine for now. So I'll press Command W and save that, and back into the comp. You can now see that we have changed that like so. So that's the first part, the type composition. So I'm going to come up to the layers panel and just get rid of that for now, because next I want to focus on the pattern texture in the background. So I'm just going to click on my sketch and press Command T to activate free transform. I'm just going to fill this into the frame a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to draw out my frames, which I'm going to start putting the texture in shortly. So I'm going to do this by pressing P on the keyboard, and that'll activate my pen tool. And I'm going to come up to the control panel and make sure this is set from path to shape. And I'm going to start by clicking outside of the canvas area, and I'm going to use my sketch as a way to trace that. Now, because I've got the color set to black as the fill color, it's going to make it a bit awkward. So I'm going to change this fill to nothing, something transparent, and I'm going to change the stroke to a black, and I'll just push this up to 5 at the moment. So now I can see what I'm doing. I'll come across and just click up like so, click up, and then join that together. Now with that joined, once that's joined, I now have a new shape. I'm going to press A, and that will give me the options to change the fill color. I'm just going to change that to a white. So there you go, there's my first shape there. So I'll come over to the layers panel, and I'm going to group this and call this middle frame. Whoop. I'll call this middle frame. And for now I'm just going to toggle the visibility of that so I can work on the other one. I'll press P, and I'm going to do the same. So I'll click here, up and across like that. And it's done it black this time, and that's fine. So again, I'll press A, select the fill color to a white. I'll put the stroke to a black, set that to 10. And I'm doing this just so I can see what I'm working with. So that's my left frame. So I come over to the layers panel, Command G to group that, and I'll call this left frame. Cool. So I'll toggle the visibility of that, press P, and I'll come and draw my other frame here, which is just a little bit down in the corner there. Again, I'll press A, up to the fill, change it to white, click on the stroke, change that to black, set that to a 10 pixel, and I'll come over to my layers panel and do some housekeeping. With the layer selected, I press G, and I'll call this right frame. And then I have, so now if I bring back my other ones, I've got my frames like so. So I'll bring my middle frame and drag that up to the top because I want that to be the frame in the foreground. And now I've got my 3 frames like so. Perfect. So I'm just going, for now, I'm just going to toggle the visibility of these and again look at the sketch. So my design here was to have these textures within these frames at various angles. So I'm going to start with the base texture. So now I'm going to come into Adobe Bridge, and this is all the assets from the texture package from Design Cuts. And here we can see we have loads of cool textures here, some really interesting ones, and there's loads of them. So I'm going to start by selecting the one that I had in mind for the base. So let's have a look where this one is. Where is it? Let's go look for it. Where is it? Oh yeah, it's here. So with this one, I'll double click and open it in Photoshop. Now, the cool thing about these textures is that they're seamless. So we can make a pattern out of these. So what I'll do is with a pattern open in Photoshop, we can come up to Edit and select Define Pattern. Where is it? Define Pattern here, which is about halfway down. I'll click that and it's called Organic Pattern. I'll just click OK. Now what I want to do is I want to make a pattern that's seamless and that's quite large that I can work with. So I press Command N, and this time I'm going to make a new print document and I'm going to set this to an A3. So it's really quite large and it's portrait. So I'll click Create and I'll press Command Shift N to make a new layer, and I'll just press Command G and just click once. And what I've done is I've created a black layer. So now I'm going to come over to the Layers panel and double click on my layer, and that will bring up my layer styles. So I'll come down, I'll click Pan Overlay, and what I can do here is select the pattern here, and where I define the pattern, we'll now have it visible in my pattern selection. And what's cool about this is that once you apply the pattern, I can change the scale. So I can blow it right up or I can keep it small, but I'm looking for something that's going to give me a lot of the pattern to work with. So this is looking pretty cool, so I'll go with that. So I'll click OK, and I'll press Command A to select all. I'll press Command Shift C, and that's just going to copy everything in that selection. Then back into my design, I'm going to press Command V. So now we've got the pattern in the Layers panel here as a new layer. And what I'll do is I'll quickly right click on this and convert it to a smart object. And that will allow me to blow it up and shrink it without damaging the image or making it pixelated. So I'll press Command T to activate Free Transform, and I'll just scale it down a little bit like so, and I'll rotate it a little bit just so it matches my sketch behind like so. Now what I might do is bring back my middle frame so I can see what I'm doing, and I'll bring this right to the bottom because this is the base texture, and I'll bring back the other ones as well so I can see how this pattern is going to work in relation to my frames here. So I'll move this into place and I'll just press Command T and bring that up a little bit. So I'll position it in the base like so, and that's perfect. Now we can see we want to replicate this texture at the bottom but going in a different angle. So back in the Layers panel, with the layer selected, I'll press Alt and just click and drag down to quickly duplicate that layer. I'll press Command T and rotate a little bit to match my sketch. And there we have the 2 textures in the background like so. So I'll do a bit of housekeeping. I'll come into my Layers panel, double click, click on the top texture, Shift click on the bottom one to select them both, and press Command G to group, and I'll double click on the group and call this base texture. Easy. So next I want to bring in the next texture. So I'll just quickly look at my sketch here. I can see that I'm looking for this interesting design. So back into Adobe Bridge, I'm going to come and look for the next texture that I'm going to work with. And I think it's going to be, yes, this one. So again, like earlier, I'll double click on the texture, and with it open, I'll come up to Edit, Define Pattern, and I'll just set that to the current Organic Pattern 48 JPEG, and click OK. And back into my Untitled document, which I had before where I created the initial texture, I'll come up to the Layers panel, double click on the layer, click on pattern overlay, and this time I can select the pattern that I just created and defined, click off that, and I can again change the scale. So I'll go with something like this. That's looking good. Maybe make it a little bit smaller, something like that. So now I have a new seamless texture. I press Command A, select all, Command Shift C to copy everything in the selection, and back into my design, I'll press Command V, and if I look in my layers panel, I can see my new layer here, and I'll right click and convert this to a smart object. But right now we can see that it's below my frames, and what I want to do is I want to get this texture into these shapes here. So a cool little technique I'm going to use is I'm going to come to my right frame, my left frame rather, and I'm going to lower this and drop it down so I can see my shape inside. I'm going to press Command and hold Command and click on the shape. Now that will create a selection of the shape I drew earlier on. So with that selection, I'm going to click on the left frame folder, come down and just add a mask. So now I have the folder with the left frame folder masked. So with that, I'll come to my new texture and just drag it into the folder. And that will then sit inside the folder, which is masked, so I'll only see my texture inside of that. And that's looking okay. Now, I'll press Command T and just move it down a little bit because I want the texture to be a little bit smaller inside. And if I move that up, we can see I'm going to need one down below. So I'll press Alt and Shift and just drag it down like that, just to quickly duplicate it. And now we've got the texture inside. Now, I also want this texture to appear inside the right frame. So I'm going to use the same technique as earlier. So in the Layers panel, I'll drop down my right frame, hold down Command, click on the shape to get the selection, click on the folder, come down and add a mask. Now in my left frame folder, I'll click on one of the layers, press Command J to duplicate, and I'll quickly drag it up and into the folder. And I'll select that and move it across like so. Easy. So that is the base texture covered and the secondary texture covered. Now I'm going to work on the texture in the middle. But before that, I'm just going to bring back my type comp, which I prepared earlier. And clicking on that, I can see it looks a little bit small. So I'll press Command T and I'll click on the edge and just hold Shift and hold Alt rather and drag that up like so, just to fill it up, just to make it slightly bigger in the artwork. And now I'm going to come and make the texture inside. Now to do this, I'm going to come into Illustrator, and here's a different asset from the Design Cuts Marketplace. This is the illustration pack, which you can get, which has loads of really cool illustrations here. But for this one, I'm going to use the animal illustrations. Now for this design, I'm going to be focusing on the mandrill here. So I'm going to copy this illustration vector, and I'll copy that. And back into Photoshop, I'll press Command V to paste, but this time I'm going to put it as a smart object. And then blow it up a bit like so. And I'm going to move it over and across. Now what I'm about to do is create a pattern within this frame here of the mandrill face. So what I want to do is put them into the middle. So like the technique I used earlier on, I'm going to drop down the middle frame, press Command and click on the middle shape. And that's going to make a selection like so. And with the folder selected, I'll come down and add a mask. And I'll come and select the new vector element and drag that into the folder. So wherever I move that now, it's going to be in that space. So I'll start by moving my mandrill face up into the corner. I'll press Command T and just move that down a little bit, scale that down. And now what I'll do is I'll press and hold Alt on the keyboard and just drag another one across, press Command T and just rotate that a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this a whole bunch of times just to duplicate the face and start to create a pattern or a texture using the mandrill face. Like so, and I'll just keep doing this for a little bit. I'll move that there. And as I do them, I'll just give them a little bit of a rotate so they're not all exactly the same. So there's just a little bit of spontaneity here, a little bit of randomness. I'll keep doing this until I fill up the frame. So I've got a couple, one more, and then I've got them there like so. So now I've got my design, which is predominantly black and white, and I've got a lot of mandrel faces, and you can see there's a lot of layers here in the layers panel. So I'll make sure the top one's selected, press shift and select the bottom one, and then by pressing Command G, I'll group that and just name the folder face. So now I have control of all the contents of that folder. Brilliant. So now that is my black and white version complete. With that, I'm now ready to bring in some color. Now, for reference, I'm going to use the colors of the mandrel. And as we can see here, very distinctive, the mandrel has this blue and red pigment in the face. So I'm going to use that as inspiration for the color of the packaging. So first I'm going to start by just making a quick selection of my colors, which I've sourced from the image here. And I'll just press Command Shift C to copy that and back into my document. Where is it? It's just up here. Back into the document, I'm going to start with the type element. So up into my layers panel, I'm going to double click on my type smart object to reveal this. And I'm going to start by clicking on the top folder and press Command V, and that'll give you my colors. And I'm going to use these colors as a reference to color my artwork here. So I'm going to start by coloring in the word wild IPA. So into my wild folder. Now, because I made this as a smart object, it's going to make it really easy to color it. So I'm going to double click on the layer to bring up the layer styles. I come to color overlay, click into the colored box. I'm going to select my red for my color there, for my color ref. Now, next I'm going to right click on the rectangle, press A, and I'm going to remove the stroke. I'm just going to put the stroke to 0 because I don't want that anymore. I just want to keep that white. For the word savage, I'm going to come into the savage folder, double click on that layer, color overlay, and set that to the blue. Easy. And this time I'll right click on the rectangle, press A, and this time I'm going to set the fill color to black. And I'll probably just keep it like that. And if I want to just make sure that there's no gap in between, I'll select the savage group layer, just move it up a little bit. Cool. So I'll move down and tweak the artwork down here. So I'll right click on the rectangle, press A, and select the fill. And because I selected the red previously, that should be in my recently used colors. So I'll select that to red. Now in this instance, I'm going to keep the black border as I like that as part of the design. I'll press T to select the maximum strength IPA, click on the color selection and just set that to a red. So now I've got the red type and the color as I want it. Now, if we look at the final design, you can see that I have this interesting drop shadow effect. Now, if I come back to my design here, if I right click on the word IPA and double click and come to my drop shadow, now even if I was to create a drop shadow that was full, a normal drop shadow, you can see that I still have this sort of white space in between. Now, I don't really want that. I want to go for the block drop shadow. So here's a really interesting technique I use to do this. So I'll just click on the layer to bring up the layer styles and get rid of that drop shadow. So to do this, I'm going to come to my layers panel and select the wild IPA, and I'll press Command J to duplicate it, and I'll double click and set the color overlay to a black. Set the color overlay to a black. Now with that new layer, I'm going to come to the layers panel and drop this just below it like so. And if I come in quite closely, on the keyboard I'll press V to activate the selection tool, and I'll press down once and left once. So what we've done is we've shifted that black layer down 1 pixel and left 1 pixel. So now I'm going to create an action which is going to allow us to do that multiple times to create the drop block shadow. So I'll come up to Window, Action, and I'm going to come down and create a new action. And I'm going to call this drop shadow block. Now I'm going to press record, and now we're recording. So I'm going to come to the layers panel and making sure that that layer is selected. I'm going to press Alt on the keyboard, press down once, take my finger off Alt and press left once. And then I'm going to come to the Actions tab and press Stop. So what we did there is we duplicated the layer down 1 pixel, took our finger off Alt and pressed left once just to move it across 1 pixel. So and then stop the action. So if I come now to the action and press play, what we can now see is we're going to duplicate that action a whole bunch of times. And by doing so, we have now created this block drop shadow, which consists of many layers. But what we'll do is we'll click on the top layer, come down and select the bottom one by holding Shift and press Command G. So what I've done there is I've created my drop shadow block, and that's a really simple and easy technique just to apply a drop block shadow like so. So I'll come up and toggle the visibility of the colors. So now we have our type layout there. So I'll press Command W and save that. And back into the design, here we are. So now we've got the colors. So with the colors applied to the block type composition, I'm now going to apply some color to the back. And this is going to be quite easy to do. So I'll press I on the keyboard to get the eye picker tool, and I'm going to press and click on the word savage to get that blue color. And I'm going to start with the base texture. So in my layers panel, I'll come down to the base texture folder, and I'll click on the top layer and press Command Shift N to create a new layer. I'll press G to activate the paint bucket and just click once. And what we can see is just one straight off layer there. And what I want to do is I want to make these black lines and squiggles blue. So to do that, really easy, I can use a blending mode. So I'll come up here and I'll come to screen and apply a screen blending mode. And just like that, we've made those black squiggles blue. Now, what I want to do this time is turn the white space in the texture on the left blue. So I've got this layer here, blue, and I'll come to my left frame. I'll toggle that down. With my blue layer selected, I'll just press Command J to duplicate that, and I'll drag it into my left frame. But I don't want it to look like that. I want it to be the other way around. So I'll change the screen blending mode and change this to a multiply. So now we have a multiply blending mode, which is making the white areas blue instead of the screen blending mode, which made the black blue. So that's looking pretty cool now. So next I want to move into the middle frame. So with my layer selected, I'll press Command J to duplicate that. I'll drop down my middle frame and I'll just drag my blue layer into that. So now I have I can see it's multiplied. And what I'll do is I'll just toggle that off for a minute because I want to focus on the mandrel faces. Now, because we put all the mandrel faces into a group, that means that I can apply a single color to those now. So I'll come to the face group, double click, come to color overlay, and it's currently black, and I'll select the savage blue. Now, if I bring back the blue layer on top of it, we'll now see that we bring back the blue and we can see that the mandrels are a little bit darker. Now, that is because the face folder is blue, and when we use the same blue but multiply it, it just makes it darker because we're sort of layering up that blue color there because it's set to a multiply. Now, if the face is looking a little darker there, I'll just click on the face folder and type it and press 5 or maybe 6, and that'll just make them a little lighter. Now, we still see this black line here. Now, that is because the base shape in the middle frame has still got the black outline. So I'll press, with the layer select, I'll press A, and I'll come up to the control panel and just set that to a transparent. So now we have our design here, and so now we have our design, and that's looking pretty good. But there's one thing I like to do to finish this off, just to give it a little bit of a grain texture, because it's looking awfully flat there. I'll come to the top, I'll press Command-Shift-N to create a new layer, and I'll come and click on the foreground color and choose a grey, not too dark but not too bright, about 2/3 of the way down from white to black. And I'll press G and fill that in. So we have one grey layer on top. I'll come up to Filter, and I'll scroll down to Noise and add noise. So what I want to do is create some noise on this layer, and if I press on the zoom, if we click on the percentage low, we can see there's a lot of grey in there. I want it to be just black and white so it's quite sharp. So I'll get something that looks like this and click OK. And there's my grain texture. If I zoom in real close, I'll come up to a blending mode and select overlay. So now we've got this really cool sort of gritty texture. But that is if that's looking a bit much, I'll press V and just press 4 just to change the opacity there. So now we've got this interesting grainy texture, so it doesn't look so flat, and the grain looks quite nice on the red there. So with my artwork more or less complete, I want to see how it looks inside a can. So what I've got is a can mock-up, and what I want to do is place it inside this, and this is a mock-up I have had prepared previously. So what I'll do is I'll come and click on the smart object, which is part of the can design, and I'll come back to my artwork here. And what I want to do is transfer, first I just want to transfer everything into it. So I'll select my top layer, I'll come to my base texture, and I'll come and drag this into my smart object for the can. And here we can see that it fits in just fine. Now what I'll do here to speed things up a little bit is I'll come to my top middle frame and select the base texture, and I'll right click and convert to smart object, and that'll just quickly render that. Cool. So now what I can do is I can move this base texture around in the background. I can make it I can increase the size a little bit or decrease the size. I'll just position it there like so. Now what I'll do is on this occasion I'll take my type comp and I'll just drag it down a little bit like so. And what I want to do on this occasion is move my bottom 2 type elements up. So I'll double click on my type comp, I'll select the appropriate folders and just move them up like so. But also I want to make them a little smaller, so I'll press Command T and just make them a little smaller like so. So they're not the same size, they're just a little bit smaller than my design above. I'll press Command W, and that should save and put it back into my smart object like so. And what I'll do is I'll press, with it in place, I'll press Command W and save. And now we should be able to go back to the can mockup and see what that looks like. And that's looking pretty cool, but it's not perfect. There's some things that I want to do to this. So I'll come back and double click on the smart object to bring it up. I'll click on my type comp and just move that down slightly. And then again, I'm going to come back into my Illustrator document where we had the animal textures and the illustration textures previously. I'm going to select my mandrill again. I'll copy that back into my Photoshop doc. I'll press Command V to paste this in. I'll do it as a smart object. And I'll blow that up nice and big like so. Bring that down and rotate across like that. And I want, this time I want the mandrill head to be a bit more of a prominent feature of this packaging design. So with that, I now want to set a white stroke around the mandrel. So a quick technique I can do here is come into the layers panel, and with my vector object selected, I'll press Command J to duplicate it. I'll double click on the layer, come over to color overlay and set that to a white. Then I'll move this below in the layers panel, and I'll show you a cheeky tip here. I'll come to filter, other, and I'll select minimum. And what this does is this just pushes it just increases the outside area of the object like this. And I can tweak this, I can push it right up like so, I can just slightly tweak it. And I'm going to go for something like this, so I can just keep a little bit of the blue elements in between like that. And I'll click on the top layer, click on the layer below, and group that, and just call that face. Press Command T and rotate it a little bit and place it into my design. So now I have my main comp where I've got the type element, and the type elements are all nice, and the illustration element on top. Now what I might do is I might just increase the size of the texture a little bit. So I'll press Command T on the smart object, and that should give me an option to just blow that up a little bit like so. I'll make sure that the element is nicely placed in the middle. Press Command W and save, and there it is. Now that is looking fine, but I think I could go a little bigger still on the packaging composition. So I'll double click on my smart object, I'll blow up my design in the middle like so, and also I'll do the same for the packaging. Get that looking cool. Command W to save. And once that's updated, we now have the final design in the can. Now, using all those techniques and the same techniques we used in this demonstration, we can make all the other can designs, which I have done previously. So there you saw how I thought about my design challenge, how I started on paper, and how I brought that sketch into Photoshop and used it as a basis to build my artwork. And then through the development of artworking, I changed my design slightly to come up with this finished product you see here. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to learn a little bit more and see more of the things I do in Photoshop, Illustrator and InDesign, you can check out my YouTube channel at Gareth David Studio. If you want to follow me on social media and see more news and updates, you can check out my Instagram at Gareth David Studio. You can follow me on Twitter at Gareth_David, or you can find out a little bit more about me and see some of my work at GarethDavidStudio.com. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.